The cold hum of the Galactic League's command ship filled the air as Commander Elisa Ferris paced back and forth in the quiet, sterile room. Her boots clicked sharply against the polished metal floors, each step echoing in the vastness of the dimly lit command center. She glanced up at the luminous control panel mounted on the wall, trying to focus on the shifting readouts, but her mind was elsewhere, locked in a turbulent whirl of doubt, guilt, and frustration. The last few hours had been a blur, a chaotic, frantic scramble to assess the situation after her fateful decision. When the fleet had responded to the unknown signal near the outer rim, it had seemed like a routine mission. A distress call, intercepted in the far reaches of the galaxy. The League sent out a small reconnaissance ship, the Valiant, under her command, to make initial contact. Nothing unusual. A simple procedure. Or so she had thought. It wasn't long before things went terribly wrong. The signal they intercepted was unlike anything the military had ever encountered. It was coded in a language that on the surface seemed like gibberish, but when decrypted, it carried an unmistakable tone of authority. They had reasoned it was a foreign species reaching out, perhaps asking for assistance, or so they had hoped. But instead of receiving a friendly greeting or even a diplomatic request, they had been met with an attack, a burst of energy that tore through the Valiant's shields, sending the ship into a tailspin, leaving Elisa with no choice but to retaliate in kind. Now, days later, that first strike had turned into something much worse. A full-scale conflict was brewing in the heart of the galaxy, and Elisa feared that what had seemed like a simple defensive response may have ignited a chain of events that would lead to the unraveling of everything the Galactic League had worked to build. A soft chime broke the silence, pulling Elisa out of her thoughts. She straightened and turned toward the door as it slid open. In stepped Lieutenant Rick Reynolds, his face as grim as the storm clouds that seemed to follow him wherever he went. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but steady. Elisa nodded, gesturing for him to sit. She sank into the chair beside her desk, feeling the weight of the decision she had made settle further in her chest. "What's the latest from the council?" she asked, her tone sharp, even though she didn't really want to know the answer. Rick hesitated, his brow furrowing. "They're furious, Elisa. They're calling it a major diplomatic breach. There's already chatter about decommissioning the Valiant and placing you under investigation. I don't need to tell you how bad this looks." Elisa swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I didn't have a choice, Eric. That ship fired first." "I know," he replied, walking over to the viewport that looked out into the void of space. "But it's not just about the attack anymore. The problem is, we don't know who we're dealing with. There's no record of any species in the archives that could be responsible for that level of firepower. No database entry, no mention in any historical logs. It's like they just appeared out of nowhere." A chill ran down Elisa's spine at the words. This was bigger than anything they had prepared for, much bigger. "You're saying they've never been recorded?" she asked, disbelief creeping into her voice. Arik turned, his expression somber. "Not in our records. And there's something even more unsettling. We've been receiving intercepted communications, encrypted, but there's no trace of who's sending them. They could be listening in on everything we're doing." Elisa's gaze turned to the encrypted transmission system, where the last messages had come through. The messages were short, fragmented, but they had one theme in common: warning. The first had been cryptic: "You've made a grave mistake." The second had been more direct: "You will pay for your ignorance." And the third was a chilling one that had arrived just hours ago. "Congratulations, Commander Ferris. You just declared war on the wrong species." It was that last message that still echoed in Elisa's mind, an ominous threat that seemed to speak directly to her, like the voice of an old enemy, one she hadn't even known she had. "I need more information," Elisa said, standing up abruptly. "I need answers. If we don't know who they are or what they want, how are we supposed to protect ourselves?" "We've tried everything we can," Arik said, frustration creeping into his voice. "We've scanned the outer rim for any clues, checked every archive we could access. There's nothing, Elisa. Not a single record of them. It's like they're ghosts." Elisa bit her lip, deep in thought. The situation was becoming more surreal with each passing minute. The more they learned, the less they understood, and the implications were terrifying. Just then, the ship's AI system chimed in with a soft, monotone voice. "Commander Ferris, we are receiving a new transmission." Elisa's heart skipped a beat. The AI's voice had a strange urgency in it. "Patch it through," she commanded, her voice steady despite the rising anxiety in her chest. The holographic projector flickered to life, displaying a swirling matrix of data as the transmission was decoded. The screen sharpened, and a message slowly began to materialize. Elisa's breath caught in her throat as the message took form. "We are the ancients. Your kind will kneel before us, or be wiped from existence." The words were cold, final, and chilling to the core. The holographic display flickered for a moment, showing strange symbols and shapes that Elisa couldn't begin to decipher. The transmission ended abruptly, and the room fell into a tense silence. "Ancients," Arik muttered. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," Elisa replied, her mind racing. "But it sounds like they know us, and they're not happy." A desperate search. The transmission from the ancients rattled Elisa's resolve. There was a raw, undeniable sense of threat in their message that had turned what should have been a routine military engagement into something far darker. The stakes were no longer about a skirmish between two unknown species. It had become a matter of survival. "We need to dig deeper," Elisa said, after a long pause, her voice decisive. "If they're calling themselves ancients, they must have a history. We need to find out where they came from, what they want, and why they've been hidden for so long." Arik nodded, his face set in determination. "I'll get a team started on it right away. We'll need every bit of intelligence we can gather." As Arik left the room, Elisa remained still, staring out at the stars. The realization that they had crossed paths with a species so powerful, so elusive, sent a shiver through her. No matter what they did now, they had already attracted their attention, and if what they said was true, the ancients would stop at nothing to destroy them. The questions flooded her mind. What exactly had they done? Why had they chosen to strike now? What made this species so dangerous that they were willing to wipe out an entire galaxy of civilizations? And most importantly, why her? Why did the ancients single her out with such an ominous warning? Elisa shook her head, pushing the thoughts aside. Now wasn't the time for fear. She had made a commitment to the League, to her crew, and to her people. She wasn't going to let some unknown force erase everything she had worked for. But deep down, a dark thought gnawed at her. Was it already too late? The search for answers took weeks. They scanned every archive, every databank, every secret corner of the League's vast intelligence network. The ancients, this mysterious species, remained as elusive as ever. They found nothing in the usual records, nothing in the archives, no ancient texts, no references, no knowledge. The more they dug, the more it became clear that the ancients were not a part of any known galactic history. They were outside it. Elisa, consumed with frustration, turned to the only source left. A rumor. A story passed down through generations in the far reaches of the galaxy, in places few dared venture. The story of a race so powerful, so ancient, that they had shaped the very fabric of the universe, and then disappeared, leaving only whispers of their existence. This was the final piece of the puzzle. As Elisa read the ancient text on the old datapad, she found the answer she had been searching for. The ancients were not just a species. They were something more, something older than the galaxy itself, something that had seen civilizations rise and fall, worlds burned and reborn. They were the architects of the universe's laws, the silent observers of all that transpired. And now they had been awakened, and they had set their sights on Elisa's crew. "Congratulations, Commander Ferris," the message had said. "You just declared war on the wrong species." The starboard side of the Valiant vibrated with the low hum of the engines, but the ship's usual comforting buzz seemed strangely out of place today. It felt more like the muffled hum of a living thing on the verge of waking, nervous, uncertain, bracing for something unimaginable. Commander Elisa Ferris stood in the heart of the observation deck, her back to the wide expanse of space as she surveyed the crew bustling around, executing their duties with a sense of urgency that matched her own. It had been days since the first contact with the unknown species, and every minute felt heavier than the last. The Council's condemnation had been swift, and the initial efforts to uncover the identity of the strange alien force they had provoked were met with frustration at every turn. Elisa could feel the walls closing in, both metaphorically and literally. The Valiant was her command ship, but now it felt like a prison. The pressure was mounting, the crew was unsettled, and the unknown species seemed to be growing ever closer, its shadow lurking just beyond their reach. Elisa's mind was sharp, but her thoughts were clouded by a growing fear. What if they couldn't find a way out of this? What if the ancients were everything their cryptic message had implied? Ancient, powerful, and ready to exact vengeance on the League for their ignorance. She turned from the viewport, her eyes landing on Lieutenant Arik Reynolds, who was seated at the far side of the bridge, monitoring several readouts on a holographic interface. His face was tired, etched with frustration. "You're looking for something that isn't there, Arik," Elisa said, her voice betraying a hint of exhaustion. Arik glanced up from his console, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not giving up yet. I don't care how many dead ends we hit. We're going to find something." Elisa sighed, her hand gripping the railing at the edge of the deck as she looked at the crew working diligently around them. "I know, but it's been days. We've scanned every piece of the outer rim and still no signs of them, no traces. It's like they vanished into thin air. We've learned nothing that can help us." "We've learned something, Commander," Arik replied, his tone growing more serious. "We know that whatever this is, it's bigger than anything we've ever faced." Elisa turned sharply, her gaze locking with Arik's. "How do you know that? We don't even know who they are. For all we know, they're just another species trying to make their way in the galaxy like the rest of us." "No," Arik said, shaking his head. "I've been thinking about this, about everything that happened. You said they fired first, right? That's what set everything in motion. But what if it wasn't just a defensive strike? What if it was a test?" "A test?" Elisa repeated, incredulous. "A test of what?" "A test of us," Arik answered, his eyes narrowing. "Maybe they wanted to see how we would respond. Maybe they needed to know if we were a threat." Elisa frowned. "Why would they care?" "I don't know, but they didn't act like any species we've encountered before. It wasn't just about a tactical strike. It was about something else. Their technology, their ability to vanish without a trace, the fact that their message was personal, it all points to something we're not understanding. The words lingered in the air like an unanswered question, and for the first time, Elisa's certainty wavered. She wanted to believe they were overthinking it, that this was just another skirmish in the vast, unpredictable galaxy. But Arek's words had planted a seed of doubt, one that began to grow as she replayed the transmission in her mind. "We've got to find out who they are, Arek. Whatever they are, they're not just some rogue species." Elisa's voice dropped, the weight of her words pressing heavily on her chest. "If they've been watching us this entire time, it means they've been waiting. And if they've been waiting, it's for a reason." Hours later, the Valiant hurtled deeper into the outer rim, a region of space long considered a no-man's land, forgotten, uncharted, and abandoned by most of the galaxy. It was the perfect place to hide. Still, the unsettling silence remained, as though space itself was holding its breath. "We've crossed the outer boundaries of the rim. We're on the edge of uncharted territory," Arek said as he scanned the newly updated navigation charts. His voice was steady, but there was a palpable tension in his words. "Whatever we're looking for, it's out here somewhere." Elisa took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Find anything on the long-range scans?" "Nothing yet," Arek muttered, his fingers flying over the holographic interface. "But something's off. There's an anomaly on the edge of our scan range. It's faint, like a whisper, but it's there." "A whisper?" "It's a disturbance in the energy fields. I can't explain it exactly, but it's strange." Arek's gaze turned toward her, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and caution. "It's not like any star or planet we've encountered, more like a pulse." Elisa didn't need to ask what he meant by that. A pulse, a signal. It sounded like something engineered, something deliberate. Could this be it? Was this the clue they'd been searching for? "Plot a course," Elisa ordered, her voice firm. "We're going after it." A discovery beyond the stars. The Valiant sped toward the anomaly, its engines purring quietly as it cut through the dense, dark void. The pulse grew stronger with each passing second, a low, rhythmic beat that seemed to resonate with the ship's hull. As they neared the source, Elisa felt a strange tension coil inside her, like the entire universe was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the anomaly came into view. It wasn't a planet, nor was it any kind of star or asteroid field. It was a massive, spherical shape, impossibly smooth, without a single jagged edge or uneven surface. It seemed to shimmer in the vast expanse of space, a dark, metallic hue reflecting the distant stars around it. Is that a ship?" Arek asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Elisa replied, her heart racing. "But we're going to find out." As they approached the object, the pulse grew louder, reverberating through the ship's systems, almost as though the vessel itself was alive. Elisa ordered the crew to prepare for possible contact, her mind racing with the realization that they had just stumbled upon something far beyond their understanding. This was not just an unknown species. This was something ancient. This was the discovery. The ship's sensors had no data on the structure. It didn't exist in any known database, didn't match any classification of starships or structures cataloged by the League. In fact, it was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The surface was smooth, reflecting light in odd patterns, and despite the vastness of space, there was no signal emanating from it, no heat signature, no visible power source. It was as though it had no need for any of the usual markers that would identify it as a spacecraft. "Commander," Arik said, his voice low and trembling, This is beyond anything we've encountered. We need to proceed with extreme caution." "I know," Elisa replied, her voice tight. "But we need answers. If this is connected to the ancients, then this is the moment. We either make contact or risk losing everything." She took a breath, trying to steady her nerves. The truth was, Elisa wasn't just worried about the potential danger of the unknown entity. She was afraid of what they might learn. Could this structure really be a remnant of the ancients? Could it be the key to understanding their enemies? "Prepare the team," she ordered. "We're going in." The encounter. The air in the bridge seemed to still as the crew readied themselves for the unknown. Elisa stepped forward, her mind focused entirely on the task ahead. There was no room for hesitation now, no second chances. As the Valiant drew closer to the spherical structure, the ship's systems began to hum, responding to some unseen influence. It was as if the object itself was aware of their presence, aware of their approach. Elisa could almost feel the weight of it pressing against her, a presence so ancient and vast that it felt like it could crush her with a thought. But she didn't flinch. Not now. Not when the fate of everything they knew hung in the balance. The ship docked gently against the sphere's surface, a strange magnetic field allowing them to attach securely. Elisa's heart beat faster in her chest. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for. The moment that could change everything. She stepped forward to the airlock, a team of specially trained personnel at her side. As the hatch opened with a soft hiss, the unknown stretched before them, an eerie silence descending over them. The light inside was dim, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The walls of the structure were covered in a strange, intricate pattern, something that seemed both organic and mechanical. It was clear now that this was not just a ship. It was a monument, a vessel of unimaginable design. And it was waiting for them. The airlock doors closed behind Elisa with a dull thud, the sound reverberating through her entire body. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady her nerves as the team filed in behind her. The metallic walls of the unknown vessel gleamed in the faint, eerie light, their strange geometry disorienting. The light itself didn't seem to come from any discernible source, it just existed. Glowing softly as though embedded within the very fabric of the ship, casting long, twisting shadows that stretched across the floor. Elisa's boots clacked against the smooth, glass-like surface beneath her, the sound almost too loud in the unnatural silence. The air inside felt thick, like it had been untouched for eons. Her breath came out in faint clouds as she adjusted the controls on her suit's helmet, sealing it in place. The visor darkened, adding a layer of distance between her and the unknown. But nothing could quell the tight knot forming in her stomach. They had just docked with something that had no right existing. The team behind her moved in perfect synchronicity, their own steps measured as they checked their equipment and prepared for whatever lay ahead. Arik was at her side, his face set in grim determination. Despite his usual calm demeanor, Elisa could see the same unease in his eyes. "Ready, Commander," Arik said, his voice crackling through the comms in her helmet. Elisa gave a small nod, her pulse thudding in her ears. "Move out, stay alert." Her boots echoed in the corridor as they advanced, the narrow passageway twisting and turning, far more labyrinthine than anything a conventional starship would require. The architecture was both beautiful and haunting. Smooth curves and organic shapes woven into intricate patterns that pulsed with an inner energy. It was like nothing she had ever seen, as though the ship was alive, a living organism rather than a machine. The deeper they moved into the vessel, the more Elisa felt the weight of the centuries bearing down on her. This was a place of secrets, of power, and possibly destruction. They moved forward cautiously, their path illuminated by soft, shifting lights that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. Elisa's instincts told her they were being watched, that every step they took was being observed by something, or someone. She glanced back at Arik, his usual calm now replaced by the same suspicion she felt. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and her hand instinctively went to her weapon, though she knew it wouldn't be enough to protect her from whatever this place contained. After what felt like an eternity, the corridor opened up into a large circular chamber. The ceiling was impossibly high, with strange, intricate symbols carved into the walls. But what caught Elisa's attention more than the symbols was the object in the center of the room. A pedestal, a dark obsidian stone-like pedestal surrounded by a pulsating energy field. Atop the pedestal sat a floating, crystalline object. It seemed to shimmer in the dim light, its surface a mixture of metallic and organic matter, pulsing with a rhythm of its own. It was beautiful in a way that made Elisa's heart race, a sense of awe and terror blending together. The object was like nothing she had ever encountered, an artifact beyond all understanding, alien in ways her mind struggled to comprehend. It's incredible, Arik whispered, his voice almost reverent. What do you think it is? Elisa felt a lump form in her throat as she stepped closer, the object drawing her in with an almost magnetic pull. She had no idea what it was, but she knew it was significant. The ancients had left it here for a reason. She could feel it. This object was a key to understanding them, to understanding their power. A warning flashed in her mind. Be careful, Elisa, she reminded herself. There was something deeply unsettling about it. If the ancients were truly as powerful and ancient as their message suggested, then this artifact was not just a relic. It was a symbol of their control. Commander, one of the officers said, his voice shaky as he stepped forward. It looks like there's something embedded inside it. A data core, maybe. Elisa stepped forward, her pulse quickening. She reached out slowly, her hand trembling despite herself. The closer she got to the pedestal, the stronger the pull of the object seemed to become, a force that had no physical explanation but felt incredibly real. Her fingers brushed the surface of the object. In that instant, the entire chamber seemed to shudder, and a low, rumbling sound reverberated through the walls. Elisa's heart leaped into her throat. The floor beneath them began to vibrate, and the symbols etched into the walls flared to life, glowing with a sudden, harsh intensity. A beam of light shot up from the center of the pedestal, blasting into the ceiling. "Get back!" Arik shouted, his voice filled with panic. But it was too late. Before Elisa could react, the chamber seemed to collapse around her. The walls, the floor, the very air itself felt as though it was being pulled apart. The light from the pedestal intensified, blinding her. A low hum filled her ears, deafening her. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The chamber was still. Elisa blinked against the aftershock, her ears ringing. Slowly, she lowered her hands from her helmet as she tried to regain her bearings. The eerie glow of the pedestal faded, but the object atop it remained unchanged. It pulsed, now more steadily, almost as if it were alive. Elisa's breath came fast, her mind racing to process what had just happened. "What the hell was that?" Arik muttered, his voice barely audible over the comms. "I don't know," Elisa answered, though the words felt hollow. "But I think it was a warning." A flicker of motion caught Elisa's eye. The walls around them began to shift, the patterns of symbols rearranging themselves into new formations, like an encrypted message being decoded right before her eyes. Then, a series of words flashed across the walls in an unknown script, their meaning just out of reach, but as the symbols morphed, a clearer image emerged. It was a map of the galaxy, strange and unfamiliar, showing territories she didn't recognize, regions she had never heard of. The map was old, ancient, but it felt more like a guide, a path leading somewhere, or perhaps leading away from something. Elisa's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. This map was leading them somewhere. "We need to get back to the Valiant," Elisa said quickly, her voice sharp. "I don't know what this means yet, but we need to analyze it." She motioned for her team to gather their equipment and fall back. The object on the pedestal, the strange map and the alien symbols. It was all a clue, a piece of a much larger puzzle. But what exactly was it pointing to? As the team gathered around, preparing to return to the ship, Elisa stole one last glance at the pedestal. The object seemed to hum with energy, its strange rhythm almost like a heartbeat. In that moment, Elisa understood. The ancients were not just an unknown species. They were a force, a power, something far older than anything the galaxy had ever known. And now, they were watching. A dark revelation. Back aboard the Valiant, the crew worked furiously to decode the map and the symbols they had uncovered. Elisa paced the command deck, her eyes never leaving the large holographic projection of the galaxy. The map was strangely detailed, yet vague. Sections of space that didn't belong to any known civilization or race. And at the center of it all, a cluster of stars marked in a crimson hue, as though it were calling to them. Arek's voice crackled through the comms. "Commander, I finished scanning the data core. There's something here. It's not just a map. It's a guide. The ancients left this behind as a warning, but it's also a map to something else." "What is it?" Elisa asked, though she already knew the answer. There was no escaping the pull of that central cluster of stars. "It's a location," Arek continued. "Something, or someone, is there. We don't know exactly what it is, but it's clear this was meant for someone to find. The ancients wanted us to see this." Elisa nodded grimly. "They wanted us to find them, or they wanted us to follow."